I had been feeling off for weeks, a persistent fatigue that I tried to ignore, brushing it off as stress or sleepless nights. But when the dizziness started, I finally made the appointment for routine blood work, telling myself it was probably nothing. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and yet, that morning, everything felt wrong. Maybe it was just nerves. I'd always been a worrier. But as I walked through the sliding doors, a chill ran down my spine I couldn't shake. The nurse greeted me with a practiced smile, and I tried to return it, but my stomach twisted in anxiety. I'd always trusted this doctor, Dr. Linton. She had been thorough, kind, and quietly attentive during previous appointments. Today, however, something was off. She was polite, yes, but her eyes flicked to me a second too long, and her fingers trembled slightly as she prepared the vials for my blood. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe she was tired. But a small knot of unease began to form in my chest. I sat down in the sterile chair, and as she drew the first vial, our small talk felt hollow. I asked about the weather, about minor news in the city, anything to fill the silence, but she didn't respond in her usual calm way. Instead, she was quiet, frowning slightly, glancing at the samples as if something was off. My unease shifted into curiosity. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She froze, her hands hovering over the next vial, her lips pressed together, and for a moment, it seemed like she might say something. Then she shook her head subtly and continued in silence. When she finally finished, she didn't place the vials back on the tray. Instead, she motioned for me to follow her out of the room. Her voice was barely a whisper, tight and urgent. "You must leave now. Don't tell him." "Wait. What?" I said, my heart lurching. "What's going on?" She glanced around nervously before guiding me to a small side office. Her hands were shaking and she looked older somehow, drained. "Just look. You'll understand in a second," she said, nodding toward the computer screen. I hesitated, the anxiety twisting into dread. As I approached, she hit a few keys, and the screen filled with my bloodwork results. My eyes scanned the numbers quickly, but then they fell on something impossible. My blood wasn't normal. It wasn't just abnormal. It was manipulated. Someone had altered it. The pattern, the markers, the unusual compounds. It was deliberate. Someone had been tampering with me. I turned to her, panic rising, but all she could do was shake her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You have to leave. You cannot let him know you saw this. Not yet." "Who? Who did this?" I asked, my voice trembling. My mind raced. My partner, the one I had trusted completely, the person I had shared my life with. Could it be them? My throat tightened, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the beginnings of a fury I hadn't known I was capable of. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me a slip of paper with a number and whispered again, "Call this if anything happens. Be careful." I left the clinic in a daze, the morning sunlight feeling too bright, too sharp, like it was mocking the storm building inside me. Every step felt surreal, every passerby a potential accomplice or threat. The betrayal wasn't just shocking, it was personal. It was deliberate, and it had been happening right under my nose. By the time I reached the street, my hands were shaking, my blood boiling. I knew with a chilling certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Whoever had done this would pay. Not now, not recklessly, but someday. And when that day came, they would understand the depth of my wrath, the sweetness of my revenge. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. The idea of walking through that front door, of seeing his face and pretending everything was normal, made my chest tighten until breathing felt like work. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at my shaking hands on the steering wheel. The doctor's words echoed in my head over and over. "Don't tell him." That warning alone told me more than any explanation ever could. Memories began to surface, uninvited and cruel. The way he used to watch me when he thought I wasn't looking. How he insisted on cooking for me almost every night, claiming it was his way of showing love. The herbal supplements he urged me to take, the vitamins he'd line up on the counter with a smile, reminding me not to forget. At the time, I thought it was care. Now, every memory felt tainted, like a lie wrapped in affection. When I finally forced myself to drive home, my body felt heavy, as if the truth itself had weight. The house was quiet when I walked in, but his jacket was on the chair, his shoes by the door. He was home. I steadied myself, practicing neutrality in the mirror, smoothing my expression into something believable. I couldn't let him see the storm raging inside me. He greeted me like always, warm and familiar. "Hey, you're back early," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I flinched before I could stop myself. His smile faltered for just a second, then returned, softer, concerned. "Everything okay?" I nodded too quickly. "Just tired," I lied. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Throughout the evening, I watched him closely, every small gesture suddenly suspicious. When he poured me a glass of water, my heart pounded. When he handed me dinner, I hesitated, then ate just enough to avoid raising questions. He talked about his day, about trivial things, and I wondered how someone could sound so normal while hiding something so monstrous. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, intimate, and that made it worse. Later, alone in the bathroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, fighting back tears. I stared at my reflection, searching for signs of damage I couldn't see. How long had this been happening? Weeks? Months? Longer? I felt foolish for not noticing, for trusting so completely. Love had made me blind, and now the price of that blindness ran through my veins. That night, I didn't sleep. I listened to his breathing beside me, steady and calm, while my thoughts spiraled. Part of me wanted to wake him, scream, demand answers. But another part, quieter, sharper, knew better. Confrontation would only give him time to adjust, to lie, to erase traces. Whatever he was doing, he was careful. That meant I had to be smarter. By morning, my shock had hardened into something colder, determination. If he thought I was unaware, that was my advantage. I began replaying conversations in my mind, noticing patterns I'd ignored before. His insistence on privacy, his subtle control over what I consumed, his discomfort whenever I mentioned doctors or tests. The pieces started to fit together, forming a picture that made my stomach churn. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't just about what he'd done to my body. It was about choice. He had taken mine away, slowly and deliberately, while smiling in my face. That hurt more than anything else. As he left for work that morning, he kissed my forehead and told me he loved me. I smiled back, calm and convincing, hiding the truth behind my eyes. The door closed behind him, and the house fell silent. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the stillness. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to break. I would wait, watch, and learn. He believed he was in control. That belief would be his greatest mistake. The days that followed were a careful dance. I moved through my routine like a ghost, calm and measured, hiding the storm raging beneath my skin. I watched him closely, noting the smallest details, how he poured his coffee, the times he checked his phone, the way his eyes flickered whenever he thought no one was watching. Every gesture, every subtle tick became a piece of a puzzle I was assembling with painstaking precision. I could feel my anger simmering, but I didn't let it spill. Anger would make me reckless. Patience would make me unstoppable. I began documenting everything, every word, every interaction, every unusual habit. I even recorded videos when he was unaware, using my phone to capture the subtle patterns I had started to notice. The supplements he took first thing in the morning, the capsules he insisted I swallow without question, the meals he prepared with too much care. All of it fit into a disturbing pattern. Someone who loved me shouldn't have had this much control, shouldn't have had access to my body like a laboratory experiment. And yet, there it was, staring me in the face. I didn't tell anyone. not a friend, not a family member. Trust had been shattered, and even the idea of explaining it felt humiliating. Who would believe me? Someone so charming, so seemingly normal, couldn't possibly be capable of this level of betrayal. That was exactly what made him dangerous, and exactly why I had to be meticulous. I began my surveillance in earnest. I followed him on his walks, noting where he went, who he spoke to, and what he did when he thought no one was watching. I checked his emails when he left his laptop unattended, though I was careful not to leave a trace. Each new piece of information revealed more of his carefully constructed facade, the life he presented to the world versus the one he controlled behind closed doors. During one of my late-night sessions, scrolling through his hidden messages, I stumbled upon a name I hadn't seen before. Someone else he had deceived. A woman who had disappeared from social circles months ago, leaving only vague rumors in her wake. My stomach twisted at the realization. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last if I didn't act. That realization sharpened my focus, fueled my determination. The betrayal wasn't personal, it was a pattern, a habit, a game to him. And I was done playing. I reached out to the woman cautiously, using encrypted messages that left no trace of my identity. She responded after a tense day, her words hesitant but filled with relief. She had known, she said, but had been too afraid to act. Together, we started to piece together his network of deceit. What had seemed like small, isolated incidents now painted a picture of deliberate manipulation, carefully executed over months, perhaps years. The more I learned, the colder I became. Revenge wasn't a rush of violent impulses anymore. It was a plan, intricate and precise. Every detail mattered. Every move counted. I plotted steps in my mind, imagining the subtle ways I could expose him without anyone else getting hurt, without leaving myself vulnerable. I wasn't going to be reckless. I would take everything he had taken from me and return it tenfold, and I would make sure he understood the magnitude of what he had done. Late that night, I stood at the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. My reflection stared back at me, eyes dark and steady, lips pressed in quiet determination. I had discovered his secrets, mapped his routines, and gained an ally who had already suffered. The storm inside me was no longer chaos, it was strategy. And I knew deep down that when the time came, he wouldn't see me coming. Not now, not ever. The moment came quietly, the way all carefully planned endings do. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices or shattered glass. Just truth, laid out with surgical precision. I had waited weeks for the right timing, letting him grow comfortable in his illusion of control. He thought he was winning. That confidence made him careless. Everything was already in motion by the time he realized something was wrong. The evidence I had gathered, medical records, messages, timelines, and testimonies, had been delivered to the right places, not out of vengeance alone, but out of responsibility. What he had done thrived in secrecy. I made sure secrecy would no longer protect him. That evening, he came home smiling, carrying takeout like it was just another normal night. I watched him from across the room, feeling something unexpected rise in my chest. Not rage, not fear, clarity. For the first time since the doctor's trembling hands, I felt steady. "Did you eat?" he asked casually, setting the bags down. "I did," I replied, my voice calm. Too calm. He paused, studying me, sensing the shift. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded and gestured toward the table. "We should sit. There's something you need to hear." The color drained from his face slowly as I spoke. I didn't accuse. I didn't yell. I told the story plainly, fact by fact, moment by moment. The blood work, the patterns, the other woman, the proof. With every word, his composure cracked. The man who once believed he was untouchable now looked small, trapped in the web he had spun himself. "You don't understand," he tried, his voice shaking. "I was helping you. You were fragile. You needed me." That was the moment I smiled. Not out of cruelty, but release. No, I said softly. You needed control, and you lost it. He reached for me then, desperate, pleading, but I stepped back. The power dynamic had shifted, and he felt it. I was no longer the quiet participant in his story. I had become the author of its ending. The consequences unfolded swiftly after that. People asked questions. Doors closed. His carefully curated image fractured under the weight of truth. There was no dramatic public spectacle, no humiliation for entertainment's sake. Just accountability. Just reality catching up. In the days that followed, I focused on myself. Healing wasn't instant. Some nights, the betrayal still ached like an old wound, but each morning I felt stronger, lighter. I changed my routines, reclaimed my body, my choices, my voice. I learned to trust myself again, and that was the sweetest revenge of all. I never saw him again after that night. I didn't need to. The chapter was closed. He no longer occupied space in my future, only in a lesson I would never forget. One evening, as I walked outside under the open sky, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. My blood was my own again. My life was my own again. And in that quiet freedom, I found something far more powerful than revenge. I found peace.